Hi, everybody. You are listening to Judging Megan with your host, Megan Judge. I'm just going to start with a few housekeeping notes, which I love to say because I think it makes me sound very official saying housekeeping notes. So I want to thank you for your reviews. Please, if you're so inclined and you've listened for a long time, I just hit my 4-year anniversary in podcasting. I can't believe that. That's insane to me. And it helps new people find me. So if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, it's really easy. You just scroll to the bottom and it says leave a review. If it's not going to be nice, don't do it. Look away. Pretend like I don't even exist. I'm not there. Just don't leave a review. And also, what else? I had something else I wanted to talk about, but that's how this morning has gone for me, where I've been driving all over the place already and forgetting things and leaving kids' homework at home. And it's half days this week and parent-teacher conferences already. And it's just, my teenager is yelling at me as usual in the morning. So it's been that kind of morning. But I am so excited to have my guest on right now.
We've all
Dr.
been put here
Anders
for a reason,
Hansen,
and
welcome
we all
to the
deserve
podcast.
acceptance.
Judging Megan with Megan Judge.
I'm a trauma survivor from a really young age, and I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD in the past few years. I've been surrounded by death and abuse much of my life. I've been dragged through the mud and have been to the point of not wanting to go on anymore. Through my interviews with other survivors, I've learned that there is a way out. From recovering to surviving and thriving, we all have the strength to come out the other side.
You are listening to Judging Megan.
So Dr. Anders Hansen, welcome to the podcast. So nice to have you.
Nice to be here.
Thank you. So Dr. Anders Hansen has a new book coming out, The Happiness Cure, which is available November 12th, this 2024, where he reveals the understanding of our brain's evolutionary roots and the key to unlocking new ways to improve our lives. Anders is a Swedish psychiatrist, TEDx speaker, TV host, and author. His books include Unlocking the ADHD Advantage and The Mind-Body Method. They have sold millions of copies and have been #1 bestsellers in Sweden and Japan for a year. 70%, wow, that's crazy. 70% of the Swedish population has read your books. I mean, that's pretty cool. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. It's 7%. 7% bought a book I wrote about physical exercise and the brain in Sweden. But that's
7%. It said 70.
Yes,
I was
7.
like, wow, that's a lot of people. Okay, so
Yeah,
that was a little
yeah.
that was a little typo. Wouldn't that be great though, Dr. Anders, if people actually, like 70% of the population read about mental health? I mean, we would be in a whole new place right now. Don't you agree?
I think so. Absolutely. You're right. But I don't think it's possible for any book to sell to sell to 70% of the population.
Yeah, that would be impressive. That would be impressive. Okay, so I always start the podcast in the same way, where I ask you a little bit about yourself and where you're from. So can you just start there?
Yeah, I'm a psychiatrist, as you say, and I'm from Stockholm. I was born and raised in Stockholm, and I studied at the Karolinska. That's a long time ago now. And then about 25 years ago, when I was in med school, I was in an autopsy room. And this is something that I remember like yesterday. And I held the human brain in my hand. And I just realized that this 84-year-old man whose brain I was holding, everything that he had ever experienced had taken place in his brain. And I was in a way closer to his inner self than he ever was himself. And then in the next moment, I realized that, oh my God, I have a brain as well. And in my brain, all the stuff that I have experienced, my childhood memories, my university days, my time as a ski bum in Chamonix, all of it had occurred in my brain. And there was something so mesmerizing about seeing the machinery of the soul, and seeing that fantastic, rather ugly looking actually organ. The mystery of it all made me decide to become a psychiatrist, and I have never looked back.
That's incredible. I mean, to be able to, I mean, I was actually thinking about this the other day because I am mesmerized by the human brain as well. And the fact that we only use so little of it too, obviously, that, like, how much of the human brain, being a doctor, do we actually use?
Well, we actually use most of it, but not at the same time. The fact that we should only use 10% or so is a myth. So we use most of the brain, but not at the same time. But it is remarkable that an organ that weighs a little bit more than a kilo can contain everything that we have ever experienced. And it doesn't use more energy than an ordinary light bulb. That's pretty fascinating. Try to make an AI work on the same amount of electricity. That's not going to happen. So the brain is incredibly efficient. However, the brain's main job is not to make us happy. It's not to make us creative or remember things or even feel things. It's to keep us alive. The brain is a survival machine. It evolved to regulate the body, and its main job is to keep us alive. And that is very important, I think, especially when you look at mental health from that perspective.
I mean, there's so much, in the United States, you're in Sweden, but I think there's a worldwide epidemic, as you talk about in your books, of depression and anxiety. I'm very upfront with my audience about my own struggles. Struggling with suicidal ideations and, very heavily in 2020, and depression, lifelong depression, and anxiety. I'm also was diagnosed as a kid with ADHD, so I know you know a lot about that. And complex PTSD was my recent diagnosis. So I'm always fascinated when I have psychiatrists come on or therapists, because a lot of times I think most of them go into this field because they might have struggled themselves. But it sounds to me like you just were fascinated by the brain. Did you go into this field just because of your fascination with it, or was it just something where you were like, I really want to help people, I want to understand? I would love to know that answer if you're comfortable.
Yeah, that was definitely a part of it as well. It was partly curiosity, scientific curiosity, but it was also the fact that psychiatric illnesses such as depressions and anxiety causes such incredible suffering. It's a different form of suffering, and anything that could help relieve that, I wanted to be part of that as well.
Let me ask you a question. So yesterday, and I don't know for sure if this has come out in the press yet, but it seems to me like the singer from One Direction may have taken his own life. And every day, it seems like I'm picking up the newspaper or, my phone to look at another person that's lost their life to suicide. This is obviously an epidemic in the United States, across the world, I would say, stemming from phones, stemming from the lack of human connection, stemming from substance abuse. Can you kind of touch on that, why we're seeing such a huge rise in this?
Yeah, that's a good question and a very difficult question. I think there is a big misconception that just because it's in our brain, we have control over it. Everyone realizes that you don't have full control of your liver or your kidneys. But for some reason, we think that if it's in the brain, we have control over it. And actually, we have very little control of what's happening in our brain. And we must realize that the diseases of the brain is not just dementia or Parkinson or epilepsy. It's also depressions and anxiety. And depressions and anxiety can be deadly. Most cases of suicide are due to severe depressions. Not all of them. Some cases seems to be more philosophically motivated, where you have decided that I really want to die. But the majority, that's my experience as a psychiatrist at least, is the result of an untreated disease, or a disease that is not treated sufficiently. So we need to talk more about suicide. We need to reduce the stigma, and we must get away from this horrible myth that these people are beyond help. There's nothing you could do about it. They have decided to take their lives. It's not like that. I can't even count the number of times I have heard people who are severely suicidal coming into a psychiatric ward, and then you see them a month later and they are totally different persons when they get treatment. So my advice here is everyone who experiences a depression, especially if you start thinking about suicide, seek help immediately. And if you have someone in your surroundings who you might suspect have such thoughts, ask them the question, a direct question. Do you have thoughts about finishing your lives? Because we know from scientific studies that you don't implement an idea into someone's head by asking that question. And my experience is that if someone has those thoughts, they are often relieved to be able to tell them. And that's can be the first step towards getting help.
Do you find too that most people, like I was vocal about my own struggles because I'm just a loudmouth, but most people don't talk about it, especially men. So what is your advice to people?
Yeah,
to get people to talk.
Yeah, the stigma has been tremendous around these things. And as you say, especially for men, it's getting better. But there's still a stigma around it. And the fact that you are talking about it to a large audience, that makes all the difference, because that breaks down the stigma. And it all goes back to this narrative that we are in control of everything in our brains, and that, you should just pull yourself up. It's not that simple. You don't say to someone who has diabetes that they should pull up their blood sugar. That's absurd. And to say to someone who has a severe depression that they should pull themselves up or be happy or calm, that's a joke to say something as absurd as that. These are incredibly strong biological states in our brains, and they are probably there because they helped us survive. If you think about it, anxiety, what is that? Well, that is to see the world as dangerous, to see the world as full of danger and prepare for the worst all the time. That doesn't make sense in our world, but you must remember that during 99.9% of human history, half of all humans died before they became teenagers. And they did not die from what we die from today, cardiovascular disease or cancer or stroke, but they died from infections, bleeding, murder, accidents. Now, that was a very, very dangerous world. And since you and I and all of you listeners are the last person in an unbroken line of survivors, because all of their ancestors survived until adulthood, of course, they have in them defense mechanisms against the things that killed us in the past. So we humans are very good at avoiding dying from dehydration, starvation, accidents, murder. But we are not very good at surviving things like cardiovascular disease or cancer or stroke, because these things have just killed us for a couple of generations. So they have not been able to shape us, so to speak. And to see the world as dangerous, that probably helped humans to survive in the very dangerous world that shaped us. And that is why so many of us are struggling with anxiety today. Because about 40% of your risk of suffering from an anxiety disorder is genetic. It's set in your genes when you're born. And from this perspective, it's not surprising that people have problems with anxiety. What I think is surprising is that there are people who don't have problems with anxiety. Maybe they should be diagnosed. To be a happy-go-lucky person for our ancestors, that was almost certain death. So I can't I find it hard to believe that, the happy-go-lucky types out there, how do they function? I certainly don't function the same way. And I always tell my patients that the main job of the brain is to keep us alive. And a strong brain is a brain that keeps you alive. In the same way that strong arms can lift heavy things and strong legs can run fast, a strong brain is not a brain that goes through periods of stress unaffected. It's a brain that wants to keep you alive, even if that means that you suffer from, for instance, anxiety. So to shift that perspective and realize that the anxious brain is actually a very powerful brain, that is very important for some patients. And I think that reframing can itself be powerful. And why? Well, we are always looking for identities and stories that explains ourselves. And if we view ourselves as sick or broken or damaged, then that might be self-fulfilling prophecies. So if we look at ourselves as I am the damaged one, I'm the anxious one, I can't have a normal relationship because I have a depression or anxiety disorder, that in itself is so toxic. If you reframe it and realize, okay, I have problems with anxiety, which I personally also have, and that means I have a strong brain. Okay, I suffer from it. Let's fix that. You see what I mean?
I think that's a great way to look at it. I've actually never thought about that before. I mean, the statistic from the World Health Organization estimates that 284 million people suffer with anxiety disorders, which is huge. And many of them don't want to talk about it, like you said. I mean, it's not like most people want to be like, oh, I'm struggling with depression, I'm struggling with anxiety. So what you're saying is more people should be open about it, talking about it, and it can kind of be a superpower, right?
Yeah, and exactly. And I don't means it reduces the stigma, this reframing. And you realize how incredibly strong these states are. Because if you could just trick anxiety by saying, feel calm, just take a couple of deep breaths, then it would not fulfill its purpose, which was to help us survive by making us prepare for the worst all the time.
So do you think, like, what does my question is, what does healing kind of look like? Like, if you were to come in and somebody is saying they're struggling, do you kind of tell people, do you go right away? I know you're a psychiatrist. Do you go the route of medicine, or do you go the route of, I know that you talk a lot about nutrition and sleep. Can you kind of talk about like your methods of somebody coming to you and what you tell people? And I know this is part of your new book as well, but I would love to know, what is the happiness cure? What exactly does that mean? Yeah, well,
first of all, if I have a patient, I of course try to assess the severity of their problems, and then I use the same treatment as every other psychiatrist, which is medication and therapy and exercise. And often one should not choose one of these, one should choose all three of them. But I make sure to reframe it in this way that they don't look at themselves as broken. And that is very important. That's at least my clinical experience, that reframing in itself can be so powerful. And if you go to therapy, a big part of it is to try to see yourself from a distance, to take a helicopter perspective on yourself. And that is very difficult. That's incredibly difficult. And you can use the brain as a metaphor in order to do that. You could think, oh, it's just my brain who wants me to be afraid. It's just my brain who wants me to hide from the world, etc., etc. So you could, by using the brain, you could see yourself from a distance sometimes, I think.
I have a question. So I like to use myself because I love to talk about myself, Dr. Hansen. It's my favorite topic. It's a joke. It's not a joke, actually, because I have a podcast, so I guess it's not a joke. I am talking about myself all the time. How obnoxious. But I'll be real. Sometimes at night, I go down this rabbit hole. And I think you're kind of touching on this of Like, I'm not worthy. Why am I here? I still struggle. I'm very open with this stuff. And I wonder, because I've been on and off medication in my adulthood, I take, like, I'll be on, something, and then I'll take a break and I'll think I'm okay. What do you say to somebody like me, like somebody that's really struggling at night? I mean, I'm of the age group, I'm dealing with like the hormone stuff, which most women in their late 30s, 40s, 50s are dealing with. But it's like these thoughts that repeat in my brain, and I can't really get them to leave. Is there something that you would suggest for, I'm sure there's other people that are listening right now that can relate to that, and it's really hard to deal with.
Yeah, that's a great question. I try to explain that feelings are not there for us to have a rich inner life. Feelings are there to push our behavior in ways that helped us survive in the past. For instance, if your energy levels in your body is low, then you have a feeling of hunger. That's your body telling you to take care of your nutritional needs. If you are by yourself too long, isolated, then you have a feeling of loneliness, which is your brain telling you to take care of your social needs, etc. And if you are anxious, it's the brain's way of trying to prevent danger, to make sure that you prevent danger. Now, since humans today, and of course during all our history, had to change behavior all the time, feelings are short-term. They soon go up in smoke. And I can't emphasize that enough to my patients, that it feels black now, but it could be something completely different in just a couple of hours or even 1 hour, because feelings are supposed to change all the time. And I also tell them that they should not listen to their thoughts, because I try to meditate. I practice that a lot, and I'm a terrible meditator. I can't focus on my breath for more than 10 seconds before I start thinking of something else. We all have that experience, right? We're not these Zen monks, who could sit for hours. Most of us aren't. And I thought first, I'm terrible at this. This was worthless. And then I realized, no, it's not worthless, because I realize how I function. There's a total chaos in here, in our brains, with thoughts and emotion, and most of it is garbage. We should not listen to our thoughts, especially not when we are in these negative emotional states. So don't listen too much to your head, especially at night. That I would advise.
I think that's just something that I know. I've talked to friends and women, and in particular, like, we deal with the waking up at night and all that stuff. And it's, it's like a double whammy. Okay. So I would like to shift. Say you're somebody like me and you don't feel like you want to be on medication, and you think sometimes you just have to go on medication. There's no other choice, right? But are there ways that you suggest to patients and people to deal with this?
What I always advise them is to exercise. And because exercise is an antidepressant, it's actually as effective as antidepressant medication for mild and moderate depressions. But in order to get that effect, you need to run or raise your pulse 45 minutes. You need to do that 3 times a week, and it will take 5 to 6 weeks. But when you have done that, you will get an antidepressant which is as effective as medication. However, if you're in a severe depression, you will not exercise. It's not going to be possible. So those patients need therapy, and often medication is tried. And medication is good for many patients. I would say that for a third of them, it works great. For a third of them, it works okay. And for a third of them, it doesn't work. Which group does one belong to? Well, you can't know that before. You have to test it first. But antidepressant medication has saved lives. And in Sweden, the number of suicides has actually reduced by 30% since the 90s. And that is probably at least partly due to antidepressant medication. But I know in the US, the situation is very unfortunate, where suicides, especially among the young, is increasing.
Do you think that the difference, though, because everybody talks about Sweden being like having their act together, your healthcare, all of that kind of stuff, there's so much stress in our country, in the United States, like we're under, I mean, I think in my lifetime, this is the most stressed I've ever been, with like elections coming up and the infighting and the hate speech and all of that kind of stuff. I think people here in my country are just on such high alert, and it's such a difficult time in our country, not to mention around the world with all these wars going on, that I think that there's like a peak of this anxiety that's coming up and coming to the surface. So I think, and then add on to that, piggyback to that, social media, AI, like the false narratives going on, the lies. I don't think any of that helps. Can you touch on that?
Yes, we've had a mental health epidemic in Sweden for young people, children and teenagers. It seems to they are worse than they are feeling worse than they did 10 or 20 years ago. So it's certainly happening here as well, but it's not as extreme as in the US. Why is it? Well, I think partly it's due to screens. Teenagers spend 5 or 6 hours a day after school on screens, and that means that they don't meet in real life, they don't sleep as well, and they don't exercise. And all these three things, sleeping, meeting in real life, and exercise, are protecting us against depressions and anxiety. And that means that protective factors are being eroded in today's society. We also know that the screen itself can be damaging to your mental health, especially if you use social media, and especially for girls in their early teens. Boys somewhat later in their teens, and that is probably because this coincides with the time of puberty. And around puberty, you desperately want to belong to a group at any cost. I want to belong to a group. And you constantly compare yourselves to everyone around you. And historically, we have compared ourselves to small groups, to our village, to our band, to our tribe. And just during the last 2 centuries, we have started to compare ourselves to bigger and bigger groups when we live in cities. And now we compare ourselves to the entire planet on our screens. And of course,
the filters, might I add. I've talked about this before, all this stuff. I have a teenage daughter. Yeah. She's 14. The minute I gave her a phone, life changed, because she's on social media. Once you get it in their hands, it's nearly impossible. She's a freshman in high school to take it out of their hands. So it's a constant battle. Yeah,
it is. And it is. So there's no roof of the social comparison, so to speak, today. And to experience that when you're in your teens, it's just so sad to see. And I think of that in terms of loneliness. As I said, we humans evolved in small groups, and in the group we were safe. By ourselves, we were basically gone. Then we would be killed. So to be part of a group was as important as having food. And that means that we are constantly asking ourselves, am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Am I successful enough to be part of this group? We always do that constantly, especially when we are during our teenage years. And to experience this screen and to have not just your friend's facade, because for every photo they post, there was 100 photos that they don't post, but you also have an army of influencers who get paid to show their perfect life. To compare yourself to that, you will think that I'm not good enough for the group. I will be excluded. And historically, for almost all previous generations, to be excluded from the group was mortal danger. Then you were gone. And that's why we feel so bad about it today. And I think personally that future generations will think that it was very, very strange that we let these incredibly addictive digital products such as Instagram and TikTok and so on, that we let them be rolled out to a generation of young people without any regulation. That's a shame.
Do you think that, because basically Instagram's a lie, so is Facebook. I say it all the time. I mean, I have an Instagram. I'm on it all the time. I'm addicted to my phone. I'm very upfront about that. I struggle with if I'm not invited to something and I'm old, like, oh, I wasn't invited to that, and it messes with my own brain. So to have this device in the hand of a 14-year-old or like a young kid, I wonder what your thoughts are on, do you think that Instagram will go away or TikTok? Do you think people are going to wake up and we're going to be like, what were we thinking? I mean, that's my hope. Or do you think it's just going to get even worse? Because it seems to be like this massive snowball effect.
Yeah, I unfortunately, I think it's going to get worse. The product of social media is not a platform that lets us distribute pictures or clips. It's our attention. We are the products. Our attention is what's being sold to advertisers. And that means that social media companies, they have to get better and better at getting our attention. Otherwise, they will go out of business, right? So they will just invent more aggressive ways of grabbing our attention. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Some of these clips on TikToks are really addictive. They're so rewarding that it's difficult to look away from them. And what we've also seen as social media has become less social. People are posting less pictures of themselves and of their friends, and they're more consuming passively these short clips. So social media is more AI TV now than social, I would say. So, and I think it will continue. And at some point, perhaps people will wake up, but we do need regulation, because my comparison with social media is to candy. When we go into the candy section, we experience something that for almost all previous generations of human was impossible. There's so much calories in candy. They are basically super fruits. So when we eat candy, our brain is telling us, the jackpot, you run upon the best berry tree on the savannah. If you eat this, you will not die from starvation, because starvation killed us in the past. So from that, we realize that we can't have candy around all the time. We just can't, because we will eat it. I can't have it in my pocket. If I do all the time, I will eat it, and eventually I will get type 2 diabetes. And I think we have to look at social media and some other addictive social products in the same way. They are stimuli that are so powerful that we can't take our eyes from them. And therefore, we can't have them around all the time. We need to create distance to them. We can't have them in the bedroom. We can't have them in the classroom. We can't have them around the dinner table, and so on, because it demands so much willpower of us to not pick it up. So when we are putting the whole blame on ourselves for this, I think we are unfair to ourselves, actually.
I love that analogy of like, it's almost like being in a candy store, like for a kid, like, and you can't, like, what kid isn't going to like go into a candy store and just like want all the candy in the store? It's the same thing with the phone. So,
exactly. And if you give TikTok to kids and then you have their homework beside and believe that they will do their homework, that's absurd as believing that if you put, 10 kilos of candy in school, kids will just eat it once and then they will go away. And perhaps I'm in the mood for that. No, they will eat everything, of course. All of us would. Because we have evolved that way. We should protect ourselves from starvation, because that killed us in the past. So we need to create distance to our digital devices as well.
Okay, so I want to ask on that. So like for kids or teenagers or adults even, you talk about the exercise component. I know personally, like I thankfully have my Labradors that motivate me. I have 2 labs and we go on these long walks every day. I know the days that I don't go on the long walks with my dogs, we walk like anywhere from like 4 to 5 miles a day. I do feel depressed. I definitely do feel depressed. So what do you suggest to people? Do you suggest, like you said, three days a week? But you think that if somebody doesn't want to go the medication route, that the exercise component can really help How many days a week for an adult? Like, what do you think for kids? I would love your thoughts on that.
Yes, if we just unpack that, an interesting question is, why do we want to be in the couch? Why don't we want to exercise? If exercise is antidepressant, which it is, if it relieves anxiety, which it does, if it also increases all of our cognitive abilities, creativity, attention, etc., all of memory, all of them gets better if we exercise. This is a fact. It's not me speculating. The brain benefits tremendously from exercise. Now, why then do we want to stay on the couch? Why don't we want to exercise? Now, you understand the answer to that question in the following ways. Almost half, as I said, half of all humans died before they became teenagers, and starvation was a huge threat to our lives. And if we ran upon something that contained a lot of calories, we should eat all of that. Berries or fruit or something. So to eat all you could find made a lot of sense in a world where there was very few calories. But the drive to eat everything you could find does not work at the fast food restaurants. When we take the drive for calories that evolved during hundreds of thousands of years in a calorie-poor world, where we put that into our world where calories are basically free, well, then we will overeat and get type 2 diabetes and obesity. And the amount of energy that we have in the body is not just dependent on how much food we eat, but also on how much we move, because it costs energy to move. That's why your brain wants to keep you still. It doesn't want you to spend all those valuable calories. It wants to keep you still because I protected you from starvation. And you might think that, okay, I'm not going to starve to death just because I go for a run. I have kilos to protect me from that. Why do I still want to be in the couch? And the explanation is that we never evolved to be normal weight or overweight. We evolved to protect us from dying from starvation, because there's never been any overweight humans during our history. So we evolved to be lazy. That's natural for us. And voluntary exercise is very difficult. It's not fun. And that's because our brain doesn't want us to use that energy. Now, if we know that, I think that's at least the first step towards outsmarting yourself. And I personally try to make appointments with friends, and I say, okay, let's go for a run this time at 10 o'clock tomorrow. And then tomorrow morning I wake up and I feel, maybe I don't want to do it today. Well, I have made an appointment. I don't want to be the person who always bails out, so to speak. So that might be one way of getting around this Achilles heels in our psychology, the way that we want to be in the couch. And I also think that we need to look at exercise not just as what's happening when we go for a run, but exercise is walking to work. It is riding your bike to school. It is gardening. It's anything that involves physical activity. So we should not mix it up with sports.
I have a question about that. So I live in LA, okay? Nobody walks here. Nobody walks. We just don't. I live by the beach, so I walk all the time to the beach. But most people do not walk to work. That's just LA. But if you go to New York, people walk to work. That's all like different cities, people walk. Do you think is there a kind of exercise that you suggest that is best? Like, is it high cardiovascular? Is it weights, or is it anything exercise related? I would love to know that.
Yeah, in order to get the maximum effect for the brain, you should try to do something equivalent to 30 minutes of fast walking per day, and 3 times a week raise your pulse so that you break a sweat 45 minutes. If you do that, you seem to get all the benefits that you can from exercise in terms of brain health. If you do more than that, you don't seem to get any additional effects. So everything up to that level will give more. But do 3 times a week, 45 minutes every time, break a sweat, that's a lot. Most of us doesn't get that. And so my point here is that the biggest effects comes from doing nothing to doing a little. That's when you get, the biggest effect. And in Sweden, at least, the number of daily steps that we take are about 5,500 now. And that has fallen. And I mean, a way to see that is that, oh my God, it's so little, why don't we move more? And another way to see it is that this is a huge untapped resource. It's basically a treasure chest that we could dig into. And the ones who don't exercise anything, they are, to be congratulated because they will reap the biggest benefits.
I would love to know, is this all, so your book is called The Happiness Cure. Why did you decide to write the book, this particular book?
Yeah, in Sweden, 1 in 8 adults are on antidepressant medication. As you mentioned, the World Health Organization estimates that about 280 million individuals are suffering from a depression and about 284 million from an anxiety disorder. At the same time, we are living longer than ever. We are healthier than ever. We are living in one of the most peaceful periods, actually, of human history. And if we are bored, we have, all the world's collected entertainment at our fingertips any time of the day. Still, so many people seem to be suffering. So the question I wanted to get to the bottom of was, why are we feeling so bad when we have it so good? And I realized that if we want to understand that, we must start with the brain. We must start with how our feelings are created. And we must understand the purpose of the brain, which is survival. And from that perspective, I look at anxiety and depressions to show what these states really are. And in the second half of the book, I look at what we can do about them. And my main focus there is exercise and loneliness prevention. And someone once said, you could have summarized this book by saying, exercise more, make sure you sleep and meet your friends in real life. And yes, to some degree, that's true, but then no one would have listened. It's when you really understand what these things are doing to the organ in which your reality is created. And by that, I mean the brain, of course. Then you will make changes. Then you will make the changes. You will get out of the couch. It will motivate you, I think. That's why there's such power in this knowledge.
I wanted to know, so the book will be out on November 12th. You have the connection between like the exercise. If somebody is really struggling, do you talk about this in the book? Like they're doing the exercise, they're connecting with other humans, which, by the way, is, I believe, like people don't sit down, at least here. I don't sit down with my kids for dinner every night. Growing up, I sat down at the table with my whole family. We ate dinner together. We talked. The phones, like we already touched on, have taken over our lives. Is there, like, when you talk about like the connection portion of it, do you have tricks, like tips for people to connect?
Yeah, some, not so many. I try to explain. I mean, loneliness itself is such an interesting phenomenon. We know that your risk of anxiety and depression increases if you're lonely. That's pretty straightforward. But we also know that the prognosis for all forms of cardiovascular disease is worsened. Your risk of dying from cardiovascular disease increases if you are lonely and isolated. And the risk of several forms of cancer actually increases if you are isolated. And that's very strange. I mean, how can loneliness be dangerous for the body? And the reason is probably that when we are alone and isolated, we are in a state that historically meant death, basically. In the group, you were safe. By yourself, you were gone. And if you are excluded from the group, if you're by yourself, you are in a state that historically meant that your risk of dying was increased. And then your stress system increases. Then you will become even more vigilant to danger because there's no one there to help you. We know that if you sleep by yourself, if you're used to sleeping with a partner, then all of a sudden you sleep by yourself, we tend to sleep more superficial. We wake up more often. We don't get so much deep sleep. That's strange. You know what? You don't have someone tossing and turning around in your bed, waking you up. Why do you wake up by yourself? And the reason is probably that if we were by ourselves, there was no one there to alarm us for danger. So we could not afford to get so much deep sleep. The brain could not afford to go into deep sleep. We also know from studies that if we are isolated, we tend to see the world as more dangerous. Neutral phases are perceived as slightly hostile if you're isolated, and slightly hostile phases become very hostile. So the world looks more dangerous when we are isolated. And that is because when we were isolated, no one was there to help us. And then the brain must be even more vigilant to danger. So if you have someone in your surroundings who is lonely and a bit edgy, a bit standoffishly, maybe that's a symptom of loneliness. That it's very important to know that. And of course, it's important to know yourself that if you are isolated, you will see the world as more dangerous. And that can, in some cases, be the first step to breaking loneliness. The good part of this is that it doesn't seem to take so much to break loneliness. There was a study during COVID. They had about a couple of hundred patients or individuals who were between 20 and 100. So they were in all parts of life, and they were experiencing a lot of loneliness. And they filled out some forms, and one calculated a loneliness score. And then they were called 3 times a week, 10 minutes every time, by someone who just chatted with them. And after 3 weeks, this loneliness score had dropped by more than 20%. And then you might think, okay, who were these callers? They must have been super psychologists who had been trained to give perfect one-liners, etc. But they were not. They were just high school students. And their instructions were very simple. Listen to the person you're talking to. Let the person you're talking to decide the topic and be interested. And so something as little as 3 phone calls a week, 10 minutes every time, has a big effect on loneliness, and thus gives these people a longer and healthier life. And I think when you're calling your mom or your grandmother or someone who is lonely, you are sending a signal to them that someone has your back. You are not by yourself. And deep within the brain, that registers as, aha, I don't have to be so vigilant for danger. And the whole stress system can sort of wind down.
I think too, this is just, I'm asking you this question, laughter, does wonders, right? So the ability to be able to laugh and talk to people and that human connection. When I get depressed, and I am a TV watcher, it's kind of like my stress reliever, because I'm running around all day dealing with the teenage 2 daughters. I feel like I'm driving them from place to place, and by the end of the day, I'm just so tired that I just want to watch mindless, dumb TV, right? So I watch a lot of really ridiculous TV, like Real Housewives in the United States and Bravo, all of that kind of stuff. And then I find what I tend to do is I isolate, I do, and that's me, and my brain being I'm not happy right now. So I think my question is, a tip could be, and I'm asking this more than I'm telling it, don't let yourself do that. Make sure that you make plans. Sometimes I'll be too lazy and I'll be oh, I have to go to this thing tonight. I really don't want to go. I really want to cancel. I don't want to go to this dinner and talk to people. I just want to be by myself. I'm not feeling great. So my question is, do you have to kind of push yourself when you're feeling like that?
Yeah, to some degree, I think you should do that and go against the instinct to hide under the blanket, because I will just get a vicious circle. And as in cognitive behavioral therapy, that's a big part of that is activation. You make plans to go meet people and activate yourself. It sounds simple, but it's actually difficult if you are severely depressed. So in those cases, you should often, but not always, of course, go against the instinct, in the same way that you should go against the instinct of staying in the couch if you want to exercise. And I mean, we can't do this all the time. None of us are perfect, of course. So we should not blame ourselves, but if sometime at least, it can pull us to the party or to your friends or out for a walk or something, that's fantastic. But we should not be so hard on ourselves because it's difficult, because this really is difficult.
What do you think about, like, I don't know if you talk about this at all in the book, but like the grief factor of life? Like, people are dealing with really hard things right now. If there's somebody out there that's dealing with like, depression, or they just lost someone. I talk a lot about on the podcast about grief and loss. What do you tell people in those situations?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, grieving is it's a part of life, and I guess I lost my father 12 years ago. I was totally under the ice for a couple of months, and then I got better, but I realized that this was a part of life, and I did not seek help for it. So there is a line there between normal grieving and sort of depression. But if you're unsure whether you should seek help or not, I think you should often seek help, and then let professionals decide what kind of help you should get, so to speak.
And also, just to piggyback on that, because I talk a lot about this, I think there's a lot of shame thrown at people that is, judgments about like going on antidepressants or going to see a therapist. Like, people don't openly talk about it like I do or you do. I think just less judgment, like more lifting each other up, especially like the grief piece of it. I know there's a lot of people that reach out to me. A wonderful woman reached out to me this past week and shared a story about her loss and dealing with, the loss of her father to suicide, and dealing with, postpartum depression, and like all of these things that are situational that people go through in life. And like, I like to tell people, just keep going. I think it's so important. So what would you say to that?
My experience is that when you talk about these things, and when you're open about your the problems that you have, your relations will deepen. And they will go to new levels. You will be surprised how much support you will get. And you will be surprised how many will say, I have these problems as well. And, after 20 minutes, you are so bonded by these experiences. So talk about it. And I think the long-term direction is a positive one, at least in Sweden. When I grew up and when I was in high school, the word anxiety, that was something that made me think of films of Ingmar Bergman, the Swedish director, and psychiatry, that was, padded walls, stuff like that. Those were the images I had in my mind. And now more people are talking about it. So it's going in the right direction. Stigma is being reduced all the time, but it doesn't happen from overnight. This is a gradual process. But the fact that you are doing this podcast, it's one of these things that sort of adds to it, to reduce the stigma, and that makes us understand that the brain, as I said, is an organ. And we are not in control of what's happening in that organ, and it can get ill in the same way that the lungs and the liver and the kidneys can get ill, and then you need help. And seeking help is a sign of strength.
I love that. I mean, they do say people do die of a broken heart, but I do like to believe if you are dealing, and this is for the listeners, with really hard things, like, talk about it. I say that all the time. Like, go see someone. If you can't afford it, you're in the United States, there's colleges, where students are getting taught and they have to put in their hours. So there's ways to get help. Reach out to a friend. There's always hope. There's always someone to talk to. So in closing, I would love to know about your book that's coming out on November 12th. Can you tell me the one main takeaway that my listeners can learn from you on your book?
We never evolved to be. I think my main takeaway is that we never evolved to be happy. We evolved to survive. And B, having anxiety and depression is not a sign of weakness. It's actually having a strong brain. If you suffer from it, there's help you can get. That's the main message of the book, to see these states in a new light and to understand that you're not broken. That's why I wanted to write the book. And I had seen so many times when I met patients that if I frame it in a certain way, if I explain it in a certain way, you could see the lights go on in them. I get it now. I'm not damaged. There's something powerful in that. And that kind of feeling was something that I wanted to awake in the reader.
Well, I can't wait to read it. Dr. Anders Hansen, your book is available, like I said, November 12th. It's called The Happiness Cure. Where can my listeners find you?
I have an Instagram account, Anders E. Hansen, as one word, and I have a homepage, drandershansen.com. Okay,
it's been such a treat being able to talk to you today. I'm really looking forward. I always tell my guests when they come on, I never usually read books before the guest comes on because I like for it to be an organic conversation, but also I'm such a big mouth, I give away the whole book. So people are like, you just why is anyone going to go out and get my book, Megan? Because you just gave the whole book away. So that's why I tend to do the way that I do. For my listeners out there, I hope that if you are struggling or somebody that's struggling with grief or loss, or they seem depressed or they're quiet, check on your friends. I say this all the time. Not everybody's loud like me and talks about their issues and their problems. I'm a big loudmouth, and I do this because I genuinely want to help you. To my listeners that reach out to me, like the wonderful lady that reached out to me this week and made me cry, and I just kind of shared about you. Keep going. Keep going, everyone. You matter. Your story matters. Thank you so much, Dr. Hansen. It was wonderful to meet you and have you on.
My pleasure. Thank you for doing this.
Judging Megan with Megan Judge.